This is not your typical passive income video. Usually you see things like maybe you can put some printables or downloadables up on Etsy, maybe something about REITs or stocks or real estate, but what you hardly ever see is any math involved in how to make a decision on which one is going to be best for you. And if you've seen some of my other videos, you already know that we are doing math over here. We are making sure that the math is mathing before we take any steps, and we're not afraid to say no to something where the math just does not add up for us. So that's exactly what we're going to be doing today. We'll talk about 5 different options for bringing in passive income, but we're going to make sure that we are starting them all off at the same starting point with the same amount of money, putting them all in the same room, if you will, and then seeing, according to the math, what actually works and what doesn't. So before we even start comparing the different types, let's set a baseline and get on the same page about what we mean by passive income, because there can be different versions for different people. So version 1 is usually going to be more supplemental, right? So this is in addition to your regular job. You want to bring in some additional money every month. Cool. A little something extra to maybe put to the side to save or to use for something specific. But so version 2 is going to be where your income is now replacing or at least covers your expenses, right? And so that's no more 9 to 5. We're talking about something that would take the place of that. And most of the people that I'm talking to in this video are going to be in that version 2 where we are replacing our regular income. So you're now thinking about what happens when you want to grow and expand and have different options, and what does the next chapter really look like for you. And that's a different conversation than how can I make an extra $50 or $100 every month. And so when I do these comparisons, I'm going to be starting off at a starting point of you having $300,000. So $300,000, we're working with the same money, 5 different routes for what to do with it, and let's see what happens. Option number 1 is going to be dividend stocks, and that's basically where you own shares in a company and then they will pay you a portion of their earnings because you are a stakeholder in their company. And that's definitely a legitimate strategy that people have made lots of money doing. Usually see returns at about 2 to 4% per year. And so if we look at our $300,000 and say 3% return on that, that's about $9,000. Or if you do it on a monthly basis, that comes out to $750 a month. And this is something that is taxable income though, right? So we have to keep that in mind. And so maybe it'll be a little bit less than that depending on what your tax bracket is. One good thing about dividend stocks is that they are very liquid. If you want to sell tomorrow, there's no title company, there's no listing the property, there's no inspection that needs to be done. You can literally just sell it tomorrow. The thing about dividend stocks though is that there isn't a whole lot of leverage when it comes to them, right? So your $300,000 earns returns on that $300,000, and if the stock does really well, then that's great, and if it doesn't do well, then that's not so great. Now, where they sometimes fall short is that the income is kind of small compared to the investment, right? So we had $300,000 that we were putting in, and we got about $9,000 back. Another thing is that tax exposure that I talked about is going to be ever present, and you really don't have any control over what happens with the stock. So to wrap up dividend stocks, if you're looking for something that's going to be a little bit of a shorter timeline and where you can be super liquid and pull your money out whenever you want to, then that's going to be a good option. But you just want to make sure you know what you're getting yourself into. So option 2 is going to be REITs, or real estate investment trust. And that basically allows you to invest in real estate without actually having to buy the building. So what you do is you buy shares in a company that owns a group of properties. And so that's things like office buildings, apartments, shopping complexes, malls, things like that. And so that company pays you out a dividend from the rental income that they collect. So REITs are legally required to distribute at least 90% of their taxable income back to their shareholders. And so that means that their returns are a little bit higher than we saw with the dividend stocks. And so you should see about 4 to 6% on those. And if we take our $300,000 again, and let's say we do 5% from a REIT, that's about $15,000 a year before any taxes. And like the dividend stocks as well, that's seen as income, and so you'll have to factor in what that does from a tax point. The bottom line about REITs is that they are a good way to get into real estate without having to actually go through the steps of purchasing a property. But in doing that, you also miss out on some of the benefits as well, because technically you own shares in a company that owns property, and you don't actually own property. And so you miss out on benefits like depreciation, which is huge when it comes to taxes and saving money on that. And so it is a good option, but it does have its downfall. So most people are familiar with option 3, and those are high yield savings accounts. Now the high and high yield is debatable, but typically right now we see about 4 to 5% annually on some of these accounts. And so if we take our same $300,000 and we do 4.5% of that, that puts us at $13,500 in year one. Again, that is before taxes. So no depreciation, no appreciation, no leverage, just a return on your initial investment. And like I said, right now it's at about 4 to 5%, but that could change, right? And so that's something that you have to keep in mind. And so what savings accounts are good for is things like liquidity, safety. It's a good place to be able to park your money, right? Especially say you need it in 6 months from now to use for something else, park it into a high yield savings account, and then you're able to just kind of leave it there until you actually need it. Now, what it's not so great for is for replacing income, building wealth, and really being able to use it as a tool or a vehicle for the next generation. So option 4 is going to be a residential rental property. And most of us are familiar with that. It's the go-to for a lot of people. But essentially you buy a property, you rent it out, and at the same time you build equity in it. It's very familiar for a lot of people. We see it on TV all the time, and it's talked about the most out of all of these options. And it can work, and it actually does work, but you have to make sure that all the numbers really make sense on it. So let's look at some numbers here, because with residential real estate, $300,000 could potentially go a long way depending on exactly what it is that you want to do. So if you take a standard 20% down requirement for an investment property and you take $75,000, that's enough down payment for a property that costs $350,000. And so if you have $300,000, you can spread that across 4 different properties at that price point. So let's start off with an example with just one property, and then we'll see how that spans across a few properties for this example. So let's say the property is $350,000. We put that $75,000 down, and let's say with the current interest rates, our principal and interest comes out to about $1,830 a month. We'll do property taxes at $400 a month, and then we'll do insurance at about $150. So total all in, that's $2,380 in our mortgage payment. Now, depending on what area you are in Houston, that rent on a property that's about $350K could maybe bring in about $2,200 a month in rent. And so already our margins are super tight, and we haven't even done any repairs. We haven't accounted for any vacancies, and we're already looking at a pretty tight number here. And if you multiply that across the 4 properties, you have this portfolio that is barely breaking even in year one. And this is all if everything goes properly and according to plan and nothing goes wrong. Now, to be fair and to be fully accurate, you are in fact building equity across these 4 properties, right? And so you have appreciation exposure over $1.4 million in real estate. There's also going to be some depreciation benefits that come along with that as well. So there are definitely some true advantages that come along with investing in residential real estate. Here's one thing that we have to include that I don't think people talk about enough, and that is the time commitment that comes along with being a residential property owner and a landlord, right? So somebody has to manage this property, to coordinate the repairs, to account for the turnover that's going to happen, and those late night phone calls about the toilet overflowing. And yes, you could hire somebody to do all this, but we just established based on the math that we just did that you can't really afford to do that because the margins are too tight. So in my honest opinion, residential real estate is not really a passive income stream. It is a job, and it is a job that has unpredictable hours. And that's not to say that I think that it is bad. I actually advocate for it for a lot of my clients if that is where their resources will allow them to be, because it does have a lot of benefits to it as well. But you really have to know what it is that you are getting yourself into. And then when you compare it to the next option that we're going to talk about, I want to make sure you have that full picture. So that's why we still went through that one. So now the moment we have all been waiting for, option number 5, which is commercial real estate investing. And even more specifically, we're going to talk about commercial real estate investing when the tenants are in a triple net lease. So let's start with what a triple net lease is. So what happens there is that a tenant pays not only the base rent, but they also pay their portion of the property taxes, the insurance, and the common area maintenance for that property. And so you collect all these things from them, and then you pay them to the appropriate people. And also with triple net leases, when it comes to repairs, they are typically going to be the tenant's responsibility. So things like the HVAC, the plumbing, the electrical, they aren't calling you for those. They're calling their own people out to fix those products for them. Now, if we use our same $300,000 example and that would be the equivalent of 25% down on a $1.2 million property. And if we say our cap rate is 7%, that would put our NOI, or net operating income, at $84,000 a year. And we also should factor in how much we are paying annually for our mortgage, and then that leaves us with about $18,000 to $22,000 in cash flow for the year. Or if you drill down a little bit further, that's $1,500 to $1,800 for the month. Now here's where it gets interesting, because you're also still building equity while all this is happening, while your tenants are paying down your rent. And we can estimate that equity at about $18,000 to $22,000 a year as well. And we've talked about depreciation a lot for the other options, but when it comes to this one, this is where you really get the benefit. And here you're looking at about $30,000 a year towards depreciation that you can use to offset some of your tax responsibilities. And while all that is happening, the property itself is also appreciating. And so if we use a 3% number for that, we're looking at about $36,000 in value growth on that $1.2 million investment. And that's some real leverage to have. And the cherry on top for all of this is not even the numbers here. It is what you are able to pass along, and the generational aspect that comes along with commercial real estate. So not only are you passing along an asset, you're passing along one that is generating income and that is building equity at the same time. And that's a lot different than passing along a stock portfolio. Now let's look at all the options and do a true side-by-side comparison. What you see here is that commercial real estate not only wins when it comes to income, it also wins when it comes to tax efficiency, to leverage, to equity, to appreciation, and all of that really starts to add up for you, right? But where it does not win is when it comes to liquidity. If you're gonna need that $300,000 back in 30 days, then commercial real estate is not gonna be a good option for you. But if you have 10 years, 20 years to be able to put into a property and reap the benefits that come along with it, then the math really isn't even close on these other options. So here's a quick recap of all the options kind of summarized together. So the dividend stocks are going to be legitimate, they're going to be liquid, but they're also going to be low income as well. The REITs will give you a higher yield, but less control and limited tax benefits come along with that too. The high yield savings accounts are a good place to use as a parking lot, but not a long-term strategy. Now, residential investing is something that works, but you have to really know what it is that you are getting yourself into. And then commercial real estate, specifically with those triple net leases, equals cash flow and tax benefits, and something that you can pass on along to bring generational wealth. So if this resonated with you, if you've been sitting on some capital and you want to talk more about how Houston commercial real estate could be an option for you to build some wealth, generate some income here, then you should book a one-on-one call with me. And what we'll do in that call is we will go over your budget, your goals, your timeline, and come up with a plan of action to get you to owning property here in Houston. And in the next video, we'll go even deeper in the conversation about residential versus commercial real estate, what the pros and cons are of each, and help us to just better understand what might work best for you. So make sure you guys tune in, subscribe, and like, and leave a comment if you have a question. My name is Lexi Sims. I'm a commercial real estate advisor here in Houston, Texas. I'll see you guys in the next video.